Imagine this: you're working on a construction project and accidentally damage a client's property. Without insurance, you could be held responsible for the repair costs. And what about the unforeseen accidents that can happen on a job site? Construction projects come with their fair share of risks. If a third party gets injured, you could be facing medical expenses, legal fees, or even potential settlements. But with construction liability insurance, those expenses are covered, saving you from a significant financial burden. So, if you're a general contractor, renovation expert, or construction professional, don't leave your business vulnerable. Nail down the low-cost construction liability insurance you need and get a certificate of insurance quickly. And get a free quote now by visiting zensurance.com/save35. Zensurance is Canada's leading source for small business and construction liability insurance. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Construction Record Podcast. I'm digital media editor Warren Fry, and as usual, on Wednesdays, I have with me from the East,
DCN and JOC editor Lindsey Colle.
and that's where we begin, as per usual. Again, what's happening in the East. Lindsey, tell me all the details.
I'm going to highlight two stories for you out here. Hope everyone had a wonderful long weekend, and I thought I would just highlight some interesting project stories that we have for you on the DCN website. So one of them, the project alone is very interesting, but what's also made headlines of late is its budget. So the town of Whitby, which is out in Durham region, out my neck of the woods, is building a Whitby sports complex that's going to be absolutely massive. So it's going to be built by Ledcor. And right now, the architect on the project is Perkins and Will. So it looks pretty expansive, and will be located just on Baldwin Street South, which kind of near the town of Brooklyn for those in Durham region who are
Mhm.
familiar with it. But nonetheless, what's interesting about it is its scope has changed drastically based off of community consultation. So it was originally um, basically, okay, let me set this up for you. The revised estimate for construction on the project is 154.9 million. So as you can see, it's a very large project. This is actually
Mhm.
43.4 million over the original budget. So
Wow.
yeah, essentially it's gone quite up in price, but it's not just because of what we hear, typically these days because of the supply chain or material costs or whatever. It's because of scope.
Okay.
This thing has um, basically, the community spoke out, according to city staff anyway, and said they have a desire for very large community center with a lot more amenities. So it's going to have a twin pad arena, it's going to have ice pads, it's going to have I guess a 10 lane pool, a second floor viewing areas, one of the it could be the largest pool in Durham region, double gymnasium, you name it. So as you can see, that would add quite a bit to the cost. So I'm looking forward to see how this comes together out my way. You never know; you might just see some project photos from me
Hmm.
as this thing comes together. The second story I wanted to profile for you guys is actually a two-part series that we did by our freelancer Grant Cameron. Tackled it. I'm sure everybody's aware who lives in Toronto what's going on down at the Portlands. It's a massive project. It's actually one of the biggest infrastructure projects in Toronto's history. It's called the Portlands Flood Protection Project. It's $1.225 billion. Elliston is playing a large role into its reconstruction. So Grant's done a two-part series on the actual build, what is entailing. It's going to be a new mouth for the Don River. It's basically, trying to recreate the Portlands, for lack of a better term,
Hmm.
so that it's a little bit more protected from extreme weather, which we can all
Oh
attest
yeah.
to is
Definitely
happening a
yes.
lot. You know that in
Oh yeah.
BC, but there is concerns out here too. Um, Work is supposed to be done by the end of 2024, according to Waterfront Toronto. So we'll see what transpires there. But I think what's interesting about this story is Grant lays out in these two parts kind of the crux behind it, obviously, but also what you're seeing when you walk down there. There's new bridges being installed. There's enough dirt, I believe, being excavated that could fill a Rogers Center. Um,
Wow.
yeah, no, it's pretty impressive. what's taking place and the amount of coordination that's gone into it. So I highly recommend checking out the series because it's got some pretty good construction details that obviously would be of interest to our listeners and our readership. Moving west, which is actually the stories of interest to those in the east too. This is also by Grant. It's a story about the Lake Manitoba, Lake St. Martin Outlet Channels Project.
Right.
And I
Yeah.
say it's a project story, but it's more a story about what isn't happening.
Oh.
Um, yeah, this has been a long awaited project. We've been reporting on it, I don't, for years now. I can't even remember the origins, but it's been a long time. It's estimated to be about $600 million. Um, Again, it's for flood protection. It's revitalizing and revamping these channels in order to increase safety. But the story here is that the Manitoba's Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, submitted a project description to the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada, which we all know that evaluates, the environmental merits behind the project, impacts, if there's any adverse environmental effects that the project could happen, and basically, it's still being investigated and reviewed. Maybe not investigated, but reviewed is the better term. So while contractors had, hoped for tenders to be released last spring, no, spring 2022, excuse me, it didn't happen. So
Mhm.
this
Oh.
story is, it outlines obviously what the project's about, but it also outlines some comments from the ministry about where things are at. So while some prep work has happened, it's basically a waiting game. So funny enough, to segue into the second story I thought I would highlight on the JOC side, it's also a waiting game for those in BC waiting on prompt payment legislation. So that's where I thought I would highlight the second story for you. The British Columbia Construction Association has got some good news, I would say.
Hmm.
The BC Attorney General's office has decided to convene a large working group to discuss creating prompt payment legislation. So, um, you know, it's a movement towards a good direction. As BCCA President Chris Atchison pointed out, there's already prompt payment legislation all across the country, from Ontario to Alberta, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick. It's time for BC to get something in order. Um, in fact, he says we're not going to stop until legislation is passed. So as you can see, it's something that they're advocating for quite strongly. So we'll see where things go. The story itself highlights kind of a first-person perspective too, from a person in the industry who's impacted by prompt payment. Um, and we'll see what this working group entails and how quickly the ball gets rolling from the consultations that occur. So stay tuned. As always, we'll have the latest and greatest on BC prompt payment. But those are some of the highlights for you from the newsroom.
Okay, great. Up next, we have an interview with Kip Eideberg. He's the Senior Vice President, Government and Industry Relations at the Association of Equipment Manufacturers. We talked about immigration in a U.S. context because he recently wrote an op-ed for The Hill, which, if you don't know what that is, it's kind of like Politico, but even more wonky. And so he talks about why skilled trades immigration is important in the U.S. And to follow that up, we're going to try in the next week or so to get a Canadian perspective on the same thing. So up next, here's that interview. And we have Kip on specifically. We talked to him in Vegas, well, this was in March, I believe. And now we're talking about a specific thing. He wrote an op-ed on The Hill, and it's all about immigration and how it affects specifically equipment manufacturers, but construction generally, and specifically American immigration. Now, Canadian immigration is a different ball of wax, but we'll get into that at some point later. So yeah, let's start with what was the impetus of writing this op-ed?
Well, Warren, I think the impetus was pretty straightforward, and that is the tremendous frustration that the equipment manufacturing industry and really the business community, broadly speaking, in the United States, is feeling when it comes to workforce development, but immigration specifically. Uh, One of the points that I make right off the bat in my op-ed is that there are far too many places around the United States where equipment manufacturers, construction workers, farmers, ranchers are struggling to find the workers that they need.
Hmm.
Um, And in fact, many of those places, there is either close to zero or negative population growth. And so when you're looking at an industry like ours, the equipment manufacturing industry, that currently has 85,000 job openings across the country, and I'll throw one more stat at you. I referenced this in my op-ed. The Associated Builders and Contractors, they estimate that the construction industry must hire an additional 540 some thousand workers this year alone to meet the demand. So when you're looking at those two figures, and then you pair that with the fact that in many parts of the country, there just aren't enough workers, and then you look at the gridlock in Washington when it comes to immigration reform and the inability of both parties to make any meaningful progress. And frustration is high because at the end of the day, we don't have enough workers. We cannot build the equipment in this country. We cannot build the infrastructure that we need in this country. And our global competitiveness is going to suffer. So the industry is fed up, if you will, with the current status quo.
I was going to say that America doesn't exist in a vacuum. Canada is specifically, this isn't construction, but H-1B visas, because there's a sort of dip and people are getting reaching the end of them, they're not getting renewed. Canada is saying, well, come on in, and people are doing that. So and I'm sure we're not the only country to be doing that. So that's another sort of. But I was assumed in the equipment manufacturing space, there's a threat of that kind of thing as well, like entrepreneurial visas and that kind of thing.
Absolutely. I mean, we need people across the board. We need highly skilled. We need shop floor skilled. And I can tell you, I hear from member companies on a weekly basis how you mentioned H-1B visas, right? But when it comes to any type of visa for highly skilled, when there are more visas, sort of formal mechanisms for highly skilled people to come and work in the United States than there are for shop floor skilled people, Canada is taking, and rightfully so, is taking full advantage of the current system, the current immigration system in the United States. There are lots of companies, equipment manufacturers, who are losing highly skilled workers to Canada. And as a result of that, sometimes we have American companies who are setting up their research and development operations in Canada because it is easier for them to attract and secure visas for highly skilled people in Canada than it is in the United States. So from a purely sort of geopolitical perspective, this is a advantage Canada when it comes to those sorts of visas. But I know for a fact, talking to some of our Canadian members, that yes, they're struggling too, and it shouldn't be this way. It doesn't have to be this way, and I think that's why we are so frustrated right now.
Well, another thing I find interesting is traditionally, and I mean traditionally going back 200 years, construction has been one of the mainstays of immigrants to come in and sort of build their way up through that. My own boss, his dad worked in construction. He's an Italian Canadian. It's the same basic thing. I'm sure that happened in the States too, like Irish, Italian, and any number of Europeans came and started in construction, and that continues to this day, I'm sure. But so that seems like there's roadblocks now to that there weren't there before.
Yeah, there are, and in fact, the latest stat you mentioned, the high number of immigrants or new Americans that work in the construction industry. Foreign-born people make up about 30% of construction workers in the U.S. So that's 1 in 3. So obviously, immigration is critical to the construction industry in this country. And you talked about, you mentioned Irish people coming over. Obviously, the United States has long been a beacon for people from around the world, right? And that's the frustrating part with this debate, because it has become a zero-sum game between Democrats and Republicans. It used to be in this debate sometimes, that it was, okay, I'm right and you're wrong. And then we argue about it on a policy level. Now it is, I'm right and you're evil. I mean, that's the sort of rhetoric that we're facing right now. On both sides of the coin. And look, at the end of the day, it's pretty simple, right? The equipment manufacturing industry, and I truly believe, the business community as a whole, we need an immigration system that provides certainty to businesses, ensures national security, provides enough compassion for people who want to come here, and also recognizes that the values and history of our country as an immigrant nation are still with us today.
Hmm.
And put differently, what we really need is, yes, we need a strong border, we need border security, but we also need more pathways for people to come and be part of the American dream. And that's where it always falls apart, at least in Washington, right? South of the border for you is that Republicans aren't willing to compromise on letting more people in, and Democrats aren't willing to compromise on tightening up our border security. And here we are today with 85,000 jobs that we can't fill, and not enough people coming into the country to help us fill those jobs.
An added problem that you mentioned in your op-ed is COVID. COVID basically froze everything in place. And besides what you say in the op-ed, that people were like moving out of various parts where there is equipment manufacturing to other areas because of COVID. Also, I think pretty much every country, immigration was at a complete standstill. Like the borders were frozen for a couple of years. So I definitely can in the States. It's only like I think last year the border opened up, or maybe a year before that. But it was at least 2 years where nobody could travel between anywhere really. So.
Yeah, that's right, and so that didn't make the situation any better. In fact, it made it an already uh, bad situation worse. And uh, look, there's a lot of discussion right now, both in Washington and in Ottawa, about how do we strengthen our competitiveness, both as individual countries, but both also as sort of the North American economy, right, including Mexico as well. How do we position ourselves to be the number one destination for foreign direct investment, for
Mhm.
manufacturers to establish themselves, for R&D companies to establish themselves, and some of that is with a view towards some of our geopolitical competitors, whether it's
Mhm.
China, probably the prime example. Well, I would argue that we cannot do any of that if we don't have the best and the brightest people working here,
Mhm.
whether it's in Canada or the United States. And the way to ensure that is to have an immigration system that is welcoming, that provides businesses with the labor that they need, but obviously also do so in a way that ensures national security. And right now, it is the system is broken. I mean, that is just the plain and simple. It is broken. And you and I talked in Las Vegas about,
Mhm.
the great momentum that we're seeing right now, stemming from the large infrastructure investment that the U.S. government made, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and the billions of dollars that are now starting to flow out to um, counties and cities, municipalities, towns, etc., around the country. Well, if we don't have enough workers to build the roads and the bridges and to lay the pipes and to repair our waterways, our logs and dams, to improve our airports, we don't have enough workers to build equipment that is necessary to do that. Well, then all of that money is I shouldn't say wasted, but we're certainly
Mhm.
getting pennies on the dollars. And
Right.
so,
Right.
yeah, that's then and we it's a tough issue because both sides are so polarized, but we are going to keep pushing, and we're going to be more and more vocal, as the days and weeks and months go by without any meaningful action.
And I guess two additional factors that aren't immediate, but the graying of pretty much everybody, like Europe, North America, China, a lot of Asia too. Honestly, like a lot of areas are getting older, and so like, that's another reason you're running out of workers. But also you've got climate change happening, where there's going to be eventually mass migration, which is additional immigration pressures, which might lead to bad knock-on effects, like doubling down on not letting in people immigrate. So these are things we all have to worry about. I don't know if that's something you factor into this immigration, I guess, matrix, for lack of a better term.
Oh, absolutely, you're spot on. Almost one in four manufacturing workers, and that's the broadest sense of the industry, right? Not just our industry, but all U.S. manufacturing. Nearly one fourth of the U.S. manufacturing workforce is 55 years or older, and that is a demographic reality that signals a pretty severe labor shortage for what is the fifth largest employer in the United States, which is manufacturing.
Mhm.
Um, and so you think about that, right? One in four. Let's extrapolate that to our industry. we support 2.3 million jobs across the US. We already have 85,000 positions that we haven't filled. But if 1 in 4, 2.3 million, I was a classics major, so math isn't my strong suit. You're gonna have to help me out here. But let's say, 550.
I'm not mine either, so we're up the creek here on this one.
We are. But let's say 500,000 people in our industry is 55 or older. Now, you fast forward 5-10 years from now,
Mm-hmm.
and we're struggling today to fill those open positions. What is happening 5-10 years from now when those 55 or older retire? Well, it's
Mm-hmm.
going to be an absolute disaster, not just for our segment of the manufacturing industry, but for U.S. manufacturing industry as a whole. And to be fair, right, because I can anticipate the criticism here. Yes, we have to do a better job as an industry to attract more people, and young people
Right.
in particular, to the manufacturing industry. There is no doubt, and we need to do a better job to talk about the exciting careers that you can have, and remind young people that this is not their dad or their granddad's manufacturing industry, right? It's a
Mm-hmm.
very advanced, high tech, sophisticated, exciting place to be and have a career in. But going back to the op-ed that I wrote, that only works in areas of the country where there are people to recruit and attract. But if you're in northwestern Iowa, and which has negative population growth or just thereabout, in fact, young people and old people are both moving out of that part of the state. Well, then
Mm-hmm.
the only way to fill those jobs is if we have more people moving there, and that's where
Right.
immigration comes in. So it isn't, it isn't the only solution to our problem. I want to underscore that, but I think it is an important solution to the problem.
And finally, as representing 2.3 million interest workers, et cetera, you have a little bit of pull when it comes to this. So where would you say, if somebody's in the equipment and manufacturing industry or construction generally, what resources do the AEM offer for them to learn more about this and then sort of decide what they want to do in regard of getting immigrants to come work for them, for instance?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, I would encourage anyone who who's interested in this issue, who's part of our industry or part of the manufacturing sector, or just concerned about the future of our country, is
Mm-hmm.
to just bring it up any chance you get. Whether you're talking to the mayor of your town, or city council member, or your state representative, your congressman. Bring it up. Let people know that unless we come to some sort of agreement on how to move forward with a common sense solution to our immigration system, a fix, we are going to be in deep trouble. So that's number one. We got to talk about it, and we got to be willing to listen, right? And we got to be willing to acknowledge that it's not either or, it's both, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
border security. Yes, it's more opportunities for people to come here, and we
Mm-hmm.
can put those two together, and it could work, because it has worked in the past. But so that's the first, my first ask. Second ask, if you really want to help us make some noise, then we have a website. It's hub.imakeamerica.com. That's hub.imakeamerica.com. You can go there. You can join our grassroots movement. We've got about 50,000 supporters across the country who are all pushing for not just immigration reform, but the whole range of manufacturing policies to help strengthen the equipment manufacturing industry. And we need every single person we can get to help us, because I got to tell you, I do live in Washington. I
Mm-hmm.
spend a fair amount of time talking to lawmakers, talking to the administration. There are a lot of people who want to be part of the solution. There are some people who are working hard, but there's also an awful lot of people, too many, who either don't want to be part of it or are too entrenched in their specific position to be helpful. And we just got to keep reminding them that if they're interested in strengthening manufacturing in the US, if they want us to be in a position to create more jobs, build more products, be more competitive, then immigration has to be fixed.
Okay, I think that's as good a place as any to leave it. Thanks for joining us today, Kip.
You're very welcome. Always a pleasure speaking with you.
If you'd like to hear more episodes of the Construction Record Podcast, we're on Amazon Music, Apple Music, and Spotify, as well as the daily commercial news and Journal of Commerce websites. Thanks for listening.